Everybody, let's just wait a couple of minutes, and if you could mute yourselves, that would be fantastic, and then we'll unmute for the first panelists, and then mute, and then open up for the next ones. Yeah, we'll kick off in one more minute. I was just commenting Gabriel on his backboard. It looks really academic. I just love it. I'm going to get one like that, and I'm going to write lots of squiggles on it that I don't understand. So. Okay. So we are recording this, everybody, and welcome to those online. Welcome to all the panelists. Delighted to have you with us. So my name is Sam Baker. I'm talking to you as a representative of all the people who have been involved in Walk2COP27. What I'd like to do is just to kick this off by a few thoughts and reflections on COP27 itself and what we're waiting for and what we hope for. Talk a little bit about the initiative, Walk2COP27, and then go into two panels. So we've got some fantastic panels. We're going to have a really rich conversation about climate challenges and responses in France from a variety of different perspectives. And this, as some of you will know, is part of a series of a number of town halls where we try and bring some form of local perspective across 12 countries from Scotland down to Egypt. So just in terms of COP, I am not a long-term COP observer. I only got involved properly in climate change probably 3 years ago. I did walk from London to Scotland, and it was glorious for COP26. So I very much enjoyed it. And I was part of that massive informal rabble that was in and around COP26, and making our voices heard, hopefully being heard inside the blue zone, standing up for what we believed in, being passionate, bringing all sorts of different perspectives, which I think was a really important part of COP. It was also exciting to be part of, and it was fantastic to exchange views with academics, with business people, with students, and with everybody else. And I hope we might capture some small flavor of that today. So COP26, there was a climate pact. The Glasgow Climate Pact was obviously signed at the end of that. And I think to all of the people involved in that directly, that was seen as a significant step forward. For many of us, outside of that formal process, it left a lot to be desired. And one of the staggering things for me, as somebody who hasn't been engaged in the various COP series, is the fact that even the mention of fossil fuel is controversial. It's just sort of staggering to me. So there's been 26 COPs where people have talked about global warming, and they know what the cause is, but they haven't, for all the reasons we can imagine, lobbying, etc., really being able to nail that comment, put in hard commitments about reductions with specific reference to coal, which is now in, of course, or oil, etc. So staggering. But anyway, there was a climate pact was signed, and so now that's left a lot of work for COP27. So COP27 is super important. It's not one of the every 5 years COPs where big things are expected to happen, but because the challenge of climate change is accelerating, it becomes important every year, and it becomes particularly important because of the leftover work from COP26. So in summary, and as I understand it, and all the panelists feel free during your part later to add or to tell me I haven't got it quite right, but my sort of high-level summary of what we hope to see at COP27 is, first of all, an emphasis on doing things. So it has been billed as together for implementation. So we hope it's not just going to be about targets and promises and getting together. We hope it's going to be more of an emphasis on action. So that's one sort of overarching thing. The second thing is mitigation. So in terms of mitigation, the Paris Agreement was, I think everybody would agree, was a breakthrough. And there was a binding commitment by all countries in the UN to try and keep emissions to, or sorry, keep global warming to 2 degrees, preferably 1.5 degrees. Awesome. Everybody knew that after 5 years, in this case 6 because of COVID, that Glasgow was going to be a big one where we pull out those nationally defined contributions, so the national plans, which then support that aggregate global target. And as many of us will know, the aggregate was wanting. So actually the implied warming, according to the nationally defined contributions, so the plans to reduce emissions, I think there was a range, but basically 2.4% seems to be the number that most people circle around. So significantly more than 2%, 2 degrees, sorry, and significantly more than 1.5 degrees. I mean, massively more. And so there is a very important job at COP27 when those nationally defined contributions get pulled out again and hopefully revised before. I think at last count, about 2 weeks ago, we had 18 revised nationally defined contributions, and most of those are from the smaller economies which emit less. So there's a huge amount of work to do before, but also during COP to try and get those nationally defined contributions up to a level which supports 1.5 degrees. And of course, in the background, the story is pretty miserable because the IPCC have said that what we need to do is halve emissions by 2030 to stand any hope of delivering on the Paris Agreement. And we're still seeing emissions rise. So that mitigation point is super important, and we all know that. The second is adaptation. So generally, I think in the past, and certainly in many perhaps richer economies, we've seen adaptation playing second role to mitigation. So lots of conversations in business, but also at an economic level and policy level about mitigation and less on adaptation. I think not least because of the extreme weather events that we've been experiencing, then everybody recognizes that there has to be more attention paid now to adaptation because we cannot stop at least some of the warming that's going to happen and some of the continued exacerbation of extreme weather events that go with that. We can't stop that, so we've got to guard against it. And so adaptation, everybody I think recognizes now, it needs to be more formalized and a bigger part of the agenda at COP, but also at national level and at organizational level as well. And of course, the impacts appear to be multiplying and spreading. And just to cite two, obviously we've seen Pakistan, which is, just the order of magnitude is staggering, with 1/3 of the country underwater. Unbelievable disruption, unbelievable. But also right now, we've seen, I think it's billed as the heaviest hurricane or the strongest hurricane to hit mainland US right now. And they don't even know what the damage is going to be, but it's got 2 million people have lost their power, apparently. It doesn't sound the worst thing in the world to lose your power, but as a sort of proxy for disruption of infrastructure and lives, it's pretty significant. So we're seeing all of those challenges multiply. So the UNFCCC have got a 2-year global goal on adaptation. And so this is a body of work to try and create a whole body around a program around adaptation to match the work that's been done on mitigation. Super important. And Walk2COP27 happens to be a Race to Resilience partner. And so we are part of the Climate Champions, which sits under the UNFCCC. We're a partner to the Climate Champions, which sits under the UNFCCC, which focuses on resilience. So we've got some insight into how that's developing and how some of that thinking is going forward. And I think it's really important. It's also quite challenging for people to think and conceptualize what resilience and adaptation is. Is it okay to build a seawall at the expense of somebody else next door? Is that really resilience or adaptation, or does everything have to be thought at a global level? And that can be very challenging. So I think even the concept is quite challenging in terms of definitional terms, but progress is being made. Now that gets into finance, and it also gets into justice, because this COP is as well billed as the African COP. And I think it's, again, well understood that many of the poorer countries, or financially poorer countries, have experienced some of the biggest dislocations and disruptions as a result of global warming, which of course is a result of emissions of the richer countries. And so right there, we see a challenge for justice, both within country to some extent, but definitely between countries. And so loss and damage came up at COP26, and it was debated and discussed, and there were some notional payments from Scotland being one. In terms of loss and damage, this is compensation effectively from richer, more developed economies to the poorer ones, in recognition of where the challenge came from and who's suffering. But a fund was not agreed to, and I think it was particularly the EU and the US who said they weren't going to support it. So that, without a doubt, will be back on the table at COP27 to discuss. And I think when you've got examples like Pakistan, you're thinking, wow, I mean, how, without a fundamental change in the way we view that, how can we, we do need to do something to resolve this significantly at a global level. But we can see it's challenging, because this is at a time when national states, whether it's the richest economies in the world, they're also now experiencing costly disruption, and they don't know what that's going to look like over the next 5 years. So we can see plenty of challenge, but the underlying principle must be adhered to, surely, and we must come out with something, some way of discussing this, and some way of resolving and helping those most in need. And so the loss and damage piece is going to be really important. So I guess that's at the highest level. I think that's really pretty much what's on the agenda for COP27. And I think it behoves us, people like us, everybody, in fact, to know what's happening at COP27 to some extent, to talk about it, to debate it and discuss it. And so the people at COP27 will increasingly feel like they're doing something observed by the common person, by everybody, by academics, by people in business, by students, by young people, by old people, and not doing something in a highly, policy-driven, elite environment. They're doing something actually which we all want to know about and we all want to see. So that leads me just to Walk to COP27 and the initiative that we've started. So in part, this initiative is to try and, in a small way, to allow people to talk about COP27, to talk about the issues that arise from COP at a national level, at a global level, together, by teams, in organizations, whatever. So the idea is really to try and provide a vehicle to elevate some of that conversation. And today is a part of that. So Walk to COP27 has 3 main objectives. So of course, it's all about catalyzing climate action at its most basic, but it's got 3 main objectives. And the first objective is an objective of learning. So I really think that this is moving so quickly. There's so many points of view. There needs to be a point of view and an understanding in almost every part of every system and economy and society that we work in. So how that works and how that works together is very, very complex. So I think the learning point is crucially important, and we can all learn from each other. And that might be a very young person at school. That might be an old person who's grappling with how to think about this. It might be a true expert sitting there. He sits right in the blue zone at UNFCCC. So one is learning. The second is solidarity, is to try and allow us to feel we're in this together. So we don't want divides between countries. We don't want divides between political parties. We want to feel like this is a common cause that we all need to mobilize against. So the second is solidarity. And in order to try and address that, we're dipping into all sorts of different types of organizations to bring people together, and different countries and different demographics. And the third is connections, is trying to establish a mechanism which allows people to make useful connections in their fight against climate change. And perhaps that's more, it's a little bit easier to do in some ways, because I think people, this issue and this cause, once we know it's common and once you know somebody else cares about it, you've got natural affinity and the connection comes more easily. So those are our three objectives. And in order to deliver against that, we have a couple of component parts to it. So the first one is to get people to walk, run, cycle, or travel in a wheelchair together wherever they are. So people can get on an app. They have been able to do this since the 22nd of September when we kicked off in Scotland, and they can register as an individual, join a team, and then sort of express themselves or feel part of the collective by tracking their kilometers. Those kilometers then get translated into trees planted in Burundi by the Jane Goodall Foundation, but also it allows them to know or to recognize that they're doing an initiative under the banner of climate change. The second way of engaging is through the town halls. So this being one of them. So thank you everybody for being here, and also we will record it, we'll disseminate it, we'll promote it. But obviously this is an opportunity for us to learn from each other, but also the people listening in. And then the third way is Clubhouse. So we've got over 30 Clubhouse sessions on the website listed. So the website is a key place to find all of this, which is walk2COP27.com. And we've got 30 Clubhouse sessions listed. And some of the ones we've had so far have been fascinating. The idea, these are informal sessions run by the participants. So for instance, we had Amna Habiba, who's a 17-year-old Pakistani girl who was speaking about women and girls and decision-making in and around the big climate decisions. And she had a searing account of what's happening to her, her family, and the people she's working with in Pakistan. And it was a phenomenal hour to spend and listen to somebody like that, who not only have got advanced views on what we should do about it, but also they're really at the sharp end of experiencing some of the challenges. So that's the Clubhouse piece. And then finally, is trying to use this to amplify all the good things that you're doing, that the people we encounter are doing on social media. So we get this sense, we try and bring this conversation right to the center, along with the many other people who are doing it. And some people have said, oh, this sounds a bit like some other initiative. How are you different? We don't have to be different. We need to do lots of this, lots of conversations, join up, work together. That's what we need. So just in terms of today, and I'm going to share my screen without exiting. So, Victor, thumb up if you can see my screen. Yeah, good. Okay, so in terms of today, we've done the introductory marks, you'll be pleased to hear, so I won't carry on talking. So we have two panels. The idea is to hear about climate challenge and responses from different perspectives. Very keen that you ask each other questions on the panel, but also that we hear the Q&A from the floor as well. What we'll ask each of the panels to do is to step through about 4 minutes of their own perspective. So we'll give you the floor. We'll then hand you to the next person. We'll do that, and then we'll open it up to questions. I will lead those questions, but I don't need to. So if somebody else dives in with questions, that's also okay. Okay, so two panels, each about 40 minutes long, and we'll definitely finish on time, if not slightly before. And just a quick look at who we've got then. And you will introduce yourselves and you'll talk about your own perspective. But from my view and sort of what people represent for the listeners, just in a very simplified way. So we are fortunate and lucky enough to have Claire, who brings a private sector perspective on what organizations, particularly big business, are doing. We've got Marie, who's got a legal background, but has also been working on technology and climate and lots of other sort of activist-related activities. We've got Trisha, who's studying at Insead, who's nailed her colors to the flag by being the head of the Environment Business Club. She's got a background in financial services, and she's just written a paper in and around climate tech. And we've got Gabriel, who is an academic institution. Very, very interesting, because this is a program for engineers, which historically has been oil and gas centric, but obviously is being challenged and evolving to the transition, to the big energy transition. So really interesting to hear about that as well. terms of the second panel, we've got Francois. So Zenon Research, as it's been told to me, Francois, and I'm sure you put me right, but this is really bringing, simplifying and communicating science around climate change to people. So yes, research, but also communications. And I think born out of a frustration that there was a lot of misinformation. So super interested to hear about that. Princy, all things Paris and ecology. So very much interested, obviously, in hearing what's happening in Paris, how progressive it is, and how things are moving there. And then we have Victor, who represents Passive House. So when we think about the built environment and energy energy conservation, then I think, Victor's got some extremely interesting things to say there. Now, all of you, I've spoken to all of you, and I know you've got, much more, you've got broader views and opinions, as well as those specific ones from your perspective, but I'm really looking forward to hearing you all, and I hope you all are. So with that, I will and it's worth just those faces, just keep an eye on those faces. So when you do ask questions from the floor, remember who's who, and you'll see their name anyway against their faces. We'll stop sharing and we will ask. In terms of the first panel, then I think just remember the order, please. So let's go Claire, Marie, Trisha, and then Gabriel. Okay, so let's stop that. And with that, can I hand the mic to Claire?
Sure, can everyone hear me? Yes, perfect. Thanks a lot, Sam. Very excited to be here to see everyone on the panel and everyone in the audience. So as Sam mentioned, I'm here to sort of represent private sector views, but I feel like I can also bring other perspectives as well as a citizen and as a stubborn climate optimist. I saw your t-shirt on the Glasgow event, Sam, so as an individual as well. I am a sustainability consultant at DSS Plus, so it's a global operations consulting firm. I'm actually not based in France at the moment, but I'm based in Switzerland, just across the border. However, I am French, and I was educated in France, so I have a strong link to the country. And I was born actually in Brittany, in Saint-Malo, which is a beautiful city in the northwest of France. And I will have to say it is a little worrying to see how climate is affecting cities and communities in not only, I mean, obviously in Pakistan and Florida, these are massive events, but these things are starting to sort of creep up elsewhere as well. And Saint-Malo is the highest tide in Europe. Even since since the time I was small, I see some differences as well within my own lifetime. So yeah, that's my tie to France. I also have worked in French private companies in different industries as well prior to becoming a consultant. So I will also be bringing a perspective from the education point of view. I work in continuing education with a Cambridge program on business and climate change. So very interested in hearing as well other views on the panel. I see that there's a lot that I can learn, and interesting to see the shift in education as well. And so now I'll just go really more into the business side of things. So I do work with the private sector. I've worked in non-for-profit before, but currently focused on private sector and helping private companies and institutions to decarbonize, and with all the challenges that come along with that. So different sizes of companies, so from startups to SMEs to large corporations. Just to bring a couple of elements, I don't want to go into so much detail, but as Sam mentioned, the Paris Agreement in 2015 was a big milestone, and that's where businesses kind of came to the table as well, had a voice, and somehow took some sort of responsibility as well in achieving targets. And I personally believe there's a lot of potential for the private sector to really contribute to GHG emissions reductions. Not only because of the manpower, the finance, but regulation is clearly not moving fast enough. And I think the private sector has understood that policies will not be fast enough in order to be able to achieve our targets. So I think there's a sort of feeling, a sense of responsibility to really contribute, and also there's a lot of potential as well. Not only that, I think there's also a lot of net zero pledges, climate pledges that are being sort of thrown out there today, and it can cause quite a lot of confusion, but there is, I would say, convergence into trying to make those credible, to try to make those transparent. It is a struggle because it is hard to compare, it's hard to know what's behind it, but there is consolidation ongoing, and really trying to figure out what it means is important, and bringing transparency to that is also really key. And I think that can really bring a lot as well. Scrutiny is fine. I think it helps us improve as well. So I do think there's a role for scrutiny and for criticism, but then again, finding the solution is also really important to focus on as well. And I will say that there are a lot of different drivers and motivations for private sector to really take action. Right now, I think a lot of the private sector and a lot of companies, and I would say not only in France, but also elsewhere, are looking at their strategies and are now looking as well on how to implement. So that's very much linking with the action part of COP27. There are uncertainties, there's a lot of unknowns, but as I'm an optimist, I think that we do have a lot of solutions, and I think we'll hear about technology innovation from other panelists, but there are solutions, and it's just a matter of de-risking, of bringing finance, and on also collaborating to make those really function and really kind of take off the ground. So I have a lot more to say, but I do want to leave some time for everyone else to give their perspectives. But I do think that there is also a fundamental systemic change that has to happen for this to really work. And France is a very interesting, I would say, country in terms of its energy mix. It's slightly different from a lot of other countries. It is 2 to 3% of global emissions, roughly at this stage, on the lower end of carbon intensity relative to other EU countries. And there's some really interesting movements and things going on. I think recently I heard on an Outrage and Optimism podcast that there's been a recent ban on fossil fuel advertisements. So interesting kind of evolution. There's also been a lot of climate litigation. So I think we'll hear a little bit about that maybe later on. But yeah, I think that people are aware and are also aware that it's not only about, the country itself, but it's also about the global community. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll pass it over to Marie.
Thanks, Claire. Are you guys hearing me? Yes. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Marie. Yep.
Okay, I will try to speak loud since I'm outside. I'm sorry for that. Thanks, Claire. Very interesting. And if you allow me, I would just pick up on that. You saying that it's all about global community. Oh no, I forgot to, but you did it so well, so I thought I have nothing to say left. As Sam said, like, I'm a lawyer, French-based and Senegalese African roots, and I'm working on in a project finance specialized law firm in Paris. And our expertise goes to advising territories and local governments agencies in structuring their projects, and especially in especially energy projects. Indeed, I'm following a lot discussion around climate, because I think they are very tricky to kind of sort out and to decide on, because if you take, for instance, just France, you have a two-level discussion between the overseas territories and the metropole, because the needs are different. and the level of development is also different. And I think this is something that we have to take into account when discussing climate solutions to avoid social unrest. And for me as a lawyer, it's specifically important because like energy contracts normally are negotiated and discussed for a long period of time, like for like 20 or 25 years period of time. So that means that contracts that we are discussing, that we are structuring for the energy, to provide energy for the industry, for the economy, are going to stay for 20 to 25 years long. So it's for me, it was important to take part of the discussion to see how we can manage this lap of time, how we can think short-term, mid-term, and long-term as well. I think this is the main difficulty, and especially with the energy crisis coming up. So I think that the COP27 is indeed the most difficult COP that we had in years. And yes, for me, yeah, I'm just open to the discussion. But those are the points that I would like to discuss and exchange with the participants. Thanks.
Thank you, Marie. Trisha.
Awesome. You guys can hear me? Perfect. Great to meet everyone. Great to be here. Thanks, Sam. I think you mentioned, but I'm currently at Insead. Typically, I'm in Fontainebleau, France, but I'm actually currently on exchange in Singapore. So I promise I have some French roots and presence, but coming to you from Asia. And as Sam said, I'm currently the president of the Environment Business Club at Insead. Prior to this, or most recently, I've been in venture capital at Antler. But my personal focus really is on both the public and private markets, thinking about how to deploy capital to impact solutions. And namely for me, that's climate tech products. Because I think if we're really going to work towards solving climate change, I'll tell you, I'm not a tree hugger. I'm someone that comes from finance. I was at BlackRock for 6 years. I think we really need to pair money with PhDs and with people who are scientists who are in the weeds here and understand what all is going on, and to power some of that with scale. I say that not as somebody who is a devout supporter of BlackRock. I think it opened my eyes a bit to how much change can happen when we instigate through the lever of kind of a financial institution, and when we have scale and capital behind climate change. And so I'll say my perspective has evolved since leaving and since being at Insead. I think there's a lot of work to do around greenwashing, around identifying metrics that we can highlight that can help us understand, okay, what's green and what's not. But I do agree that climate change is universally for everyone. And so that's the agenda that I've been pushing at Insead. And I think some of this we're seeing in the markets today. You know, there are newer and younger buyers demanding green products without premiums. You have corporates reinventing because they're no longer relevant with what they're building. And consumers are moving towards more sustainable preferences. And then on the flip side, and I think, Claire, some of your points, I think startups are building to fuel some of this sustainable innovation, and it's quite exciting, but they need capital. And a lot of these changes in my perspective have had a big impact on business and policy. You see markets and prices and shift change. You see commodities shifting in their prices because now they're in greater demand for some of the products that consume things like lithium or silicon or copper. And you also see sustainability kind of testing the limits of traditional funding. So if you think about some of the deep tech investments out there, they need more than 6 or 7 years of capital. And so all in all, I think this is something we're going to see everywhere. And I'll just say, having been at Insead and, you know, in a place where people are recruiting for all types of jobs and consulting and data and analytics, it's really been a big push from our end to say, look, no matter what job you're in, you need to know energy transition finance. You need to know the price of carbon in your NPV model. You need to know how consumers are shifting their preferences so that they buy your product when you build a strategy. And that's been the really exciting thing for me to push and to try to help educate around. So I'll just pause there. Thanks.
Very good. And that's a nice segue, Gabriel, into you. Something about education.
Yeah. So thanks a lot for the invitation. It's very interesting to go to Sharm el-Sheikh. I've been there a long time ago, but unfortunately it was with a plane. Now it's better. So researcher basically. I'm working in fundamental physics, and so I'm attached at French University. And from that, I have to teach as well at university. And in our university, there is an engineer school. And there are different things at this school, from telecom, from informatics, from mathematics, and other things. And there is historically oil and gas courses.
Sorry, Gabriel, could I just interrupt you 1 second? I think there's something scratching around the microphone a little bit.
This way. Okay, here. That's better. Okay, sorry. And so from my history, I read a lot and still reading a lot, so maybe this way, about ecological and environmental stuff. So I'm quite convinced since a long time that there are many things that should have been done already anyway. But from my duty, I have to teach physics at school. And there is this courses, and I've been there mainly by chance and just teaching physics. And amazingly, all these students which are there are basically made for construction industry. It means that they are providing AC, they are providing how to make huge engine, how to manage to have oil, gas, heater, cooler, and everything working at industry. That's what we are teaching to them. In fact, I'm just teaching physics, but what is amazing is that most of the students up to now don't really realize their impact on their job. Few of them just think, maybe my job is doing something bad, but most of them don't think really about it. And those apart from the teachers, most of them are convinced, like me, that we should do something, but we are still making students who are making the bad things. So that's kind of weird. And that's another thing that at university. In fact, most of people are not convinced that there is something that we should and we could do. That's the most interesting things. And hopefully, maybe you know the SHIFT project in France, which is some people who are helping some other people who wants to do some things. And they make a nice project with a huge engineering community 2 years ago to think how and what we should do for engineers to help them to think about this problematic. And they make a nice report about it. And so I read it, of course. And now, especially after this summer, but not only, there are quite a lot of enough people to start to make a slight change in the direction of this school. And that's exactly what maybe I will speak about here. So that's it for the moment.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And just to follow on from that, Gabriel, I mean, I had a very interesting conversation with a professor of economics in Austria, and she's doing something similar, but obviously in a very different discipline. And, you know, on the one hand, it's like obvious because that's the way the world's going and they have to learn this. On the other hand, you're trying to convince faculty who've been teaching perhaps similar, perhaps not the same thing, but similar things for many years. And it can be very difficult, I think, to change institutions, particularly academic institutions, but I'm sure we'll hear more in a minute. So, okay, well, thank you so much for the perspectives and the introductions, everybody. So, typically as we sort of cycle through, I guess the issue is, the things that we've talked about, how climate change is impacting, and just, if anybody's got other bits and pieces around that, then drop it in. But perhaps we should move on to the next bit, really, which is sort of what are we doing about it? And I suppose, each of your areas, you're close to things that are being done about it, and you've outlined some of those. So perhaps I could ask maybe Claire and then Trisha, just on sort of what are we doing about it? Maybe Claire, obviously there's client confidentiality, so you probably can't, name a client, but could you talk about a good example of what people are doing about it, organizations are doing about it, which you believe in? Because I heard there was a little bit of flip-flapping whether you're truly optimistic or not, but let's hear a story that you feel represents what we should be doing. And then maybe Trisha, to you, sort of following on from that, is really sort of, okay, so you've been looking at the market, you're looking at the new technologies rather than sort of established new technologies can come out of established organizations, but you're looking at technology. So again, just give us a sense of sort of where do you think the promising, where's the big gaps and where are the big opportunities? So why don't we do that, and then let's move on to things for Gabriel and Marie.
Sure, happy to share. No, I am an optimist. Maybe it's the French part of me. But no, in terms of what's being done, I think at least within my experience is collaborations. I think that's collaborations and partnerships. I think that's a massive opportunity, not only to share knowledge, but to share resources, generally speaking. And that's something that I've particularly worked on, and I won't share any names, but I've worked with an energy provider to collaborate with them to reach out to their whole entire client base to help them decarbonize. So we bring knowledge and we help them roadmap and do some diagnostics, and then they will help implement the actual actions to help decarbonize. So building partnerships and collaborations, I think, is something that's being done currently in the private sector, but not only within just companies, but also with academia. So I think this is why this conversation is really interesting. I worked with basically two I would say universities who had basically built a sort of, I'm not sure if it's a foundation, but a sort of entity to work on climate solutions. And I worked with them to build a model to build a fund on how to fund carbon removals technologies. So it's not only the private sector or private companies with private companies, but also with academia as well. And I know that this is also happening in terms of public-private partnerships as well, with private sort of funds going towards initiatives that are being followed within specific cities and communities and towns. So those are just three small examples of what's happening, all based around, I would say, collaboration.
Yeah, and I think that something that's come up in the other town halls, something that comes up, I'm sure, in all of our daily jobs, is the fact that there are complex solutions required which have to be integrated, and they have to reflect the different intersectional domains of health and energy, et cetera, so collaboration is really important, because nobody crosses all of those domains. But one observation I would have about business is that it's very difficult to construct a good sort of collaborative partnership. It's very difficult to navigate the conflicts of interest. It's very rarely at the center of what the company or organization does. So I think on the one hand, it's important and necessary.
Mm-hmm.
I think traditional ways of approaching collaborations tend to be, an exciting, optional something on the side, as opposed to right at the core of the business.
No, I agree. It doesn't, it comes with challenges, right? It's not easy. There's obviously potential IP, there's, confidentiality, data confidentiality on a lot of things. I think in terms of the way where we were successful with my firm is that we share really common values. We're impact driven, and also we both found I would say interest and potential and also commercial advantages for this collaboration and this partnership as well. So it's not always an easy thing to find who to partner with, for sure. You have to find the right partners. You have to, be willing to share to a certain extent information, and also just have very, very close values, I would say.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Trisha? Any reflections on that?
Sure.
I'm sure you think about that as well as you think about investing.
No, absolutely. I think maybe I'll give you a VC view. I'll give you my view, and then I'll give you kind of a public markets BlackRock view. But I think quite interesting this year because the markets have not done well traditionally, right? Like IPO valuations are down, revenue multiples aren't great. But if you think about impact, climate tech has actually grown super fast. I think it's grown faster than most other sectors. And I spent some time looking at this because I was trying to think about which sectors within this space are interesting from an investor lens, and specifically as we see energy prices and policy changing, like where's the pressure for innovators going, and where do we think will accelerate? So I'll tell you my top 4. The first one is around infrastructure, and for me this is, I guess, the term for kind of retrofitting buildings, heat pumps, decentralizing energy, everything to do with upgrading electrification. I think is a quite interesting space, specifically because a lot of the public funding that's coming in here and the ties to tax breaks. And I think also in terms of innovation, there's a lot of AI and robotics and interesting work being done. So that's one space that I think is quite lucrative. The other one is around data. And this is something I saw a lot at BlackRock because I think climate risk obviously exists across all sectors, but to be able to model that out, you need a fair amount of information around historical trends, future trends, sector budgets. And it's something that everyone needs. It's something that every vertical, every company needs as they think about their business models and how the heck they're going to comply with this net zero agreement that everyone has made. And I think it's also one of the biggest hurdles that corporates face today, as there's not really a standardized way to think about some of this data. So I think that's a space for growth. And the other 2 are around carbon capture and ag tech. And I won't give you all my details, but I'm happy to share with anyone offline if interested. But just to leave it on the black side for different reasons. And what's being done here is a lot of partnership to drive indexation. So think about you invest in S&P 500, an index investor, you're looking for an alternative. You need S&P to create a sustainable index, and those don't exist. So building some of that is important. I think democratizing access for retail investors has been something super important, and kind of the proxy voting space. I'm not sure if I lost you.
We just about kept you there. It blinked a little bit, but I think we heard it. Yeah.
Okay, I can pause there then.
Okay.
Can I ask a quick question then? Sorry, just curious, as you mentioned data, you include all the systems to sort of to measure and track as well, right? All the sort of MRV systems, is that included in the data bucket? I think
Trisha?
you have some sound issues.
Stuff.
I can keep that for another.
Yeah, and I suspect I'm sure it is. It's quite difficult to divorce data from the mechanism around it and the rules around it. But okay, yeah. Awesome. So perhaps Marie, we could come to you. So I mean, there were two things I was struck by your introduction. I think one was the portfolio of challenges that France has, with very, very different territorial, sort of geographical, economic, social contexts. So I think that's a sort of super interesting area to just reflect on. And then the second thing you said, which, well, I mean, it was all interesting, but the second thing I noted was this idea of these very long contracts. And so choose which one to focus on. But I guess my question about the second one is, you know, it sounds like that's a vehicle, that the construction of those contracts is a real catalyst or retardant for progress. You know what I mean? Because if they're constructed in yesterday's shape and form, you know, it's going to keep us to the far. If they're constructed in a progressive way, it's phenomenal. So maybe that second bit, if you feel you can comment on that. So how can we make sure that those constructions of those contracts are really progressive? Because that seems like a phenomenal opportunity to help the transition go more quickly.
Yeah, I will pick up on that, on this question, Sam, thanks. I believe indeed that those contracts, the energy, the power contracts are, and especially the what we call like corporate, the corporate power purchase PPAs, power purchase agreements, are indeed huge catalyzers when it comes to decarbonize the energy that the big economies, like big industry, are using. But then the thing is, like, it's related to the ongoing conversation, discussion on at EU level, because the discussion is about like accelerating the authorization and the permitting, so that the like companies that are willing to sign independent like PPAs with they get the opportunity to do it now. Because if we are taking the permitting, meaning all the authorization that you need to set up a new power plant, if it takes too long, let's say 5 years time, then the map of our power, of how like the mix of our power in France is going to be totally different. So indeed, we do need to take action, and France is sadly the last, like one of the last when it comes to permitting, and when it comes to achieving the goals in terms of renewable projects, because it takes a lot of time to get like all the permits. And it's also linked, and this is why like I believe that Walk2COP27, it's a very welcome opportunity in France. The permitting is taking so long. It's linked with the acceptability, because if the citizens, they do not want like a wind power plant near to their place, then you can't convince industrials and economic players to go towards renewable energy when they are contracting with independent power producers. And you do not, simply saying, you don't have the capacity to offer to economic players to decarbonize the energy.
Okay, plenty of challenges. Okay, so sort of just now we're on our sort of wrap up, I guess, of panel one. So Gabriel, if we can come to you first though, and just say, well, you know, you've painted, I guess, a picture of change, but it does sound quite modest. So the question for you, Gabriel, I guess, is really how do you see, or how could we hope for a really rapid transition over the next whatever 5 years, so that the people coming out of your department, out of your degrees, aren't, as you say, skilled up to create the bad stuff, but actually skilled up to catalyze change and create the good stuff?
Well. I think in few years, what is inside the courses can be switched. That's easy. But it's not exactly maybe what it should be done, because then, in fact, what we the basis of our work is to have people who are going to have a work. Basically, they need to work. And what we hear and what we learn from the company these days is, please continue to make your students, but could you tell them what we should do to consume, to use less energy, whatever the energy, nuclear, gas, whatever, they don't really care about it. And by saying to our student, this is everything you are building is making something which have an impact somewhere. That's maybe what the most important thing that a student should learn from us. Because everything which is now everywhere is we build things, we take things from nature, put energy on it, make a mix and have something to buy. Okay, that's something which the student and the engineer should really think about. And this is maybe more than challenging. For example, here we have teachers who did not know about IPCC right now. I mean, I just didn't believe it, but they don't know about this, right? Most of the students these days, they knew about something happening, that's clear. But when we are asking them, could you please tell me what is happening? They don't really understand and they can't really explain what is coming from, CO2, blah, 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 solar stuff. It's not clear. What my point is that the basic knowledge to understand what's happening, it's from scientific point of view, is not clear. And even more, and it's something I wish to share with you, is once engineers already recognize that they are making things which have influence in everything. How to say? Should they think that a company should necessarily grow? I mean, we have a lot of students here and we ask them to speak about what's happening in their company, because that's a kind of deal. And they always see and show a picture with an arrow. Our company is growing. Everything is growing. So I guess you learned about the Meadows report that is 60 years, or I don't remember exactly. That's an anniversary of the Meadows report. And I'm always telling them, are you sure that a company should necessarily grow? And I think the problem is more deep. And I wish that something that we could teach to our students is not only to make green stuff, because it doesn't mean any things, just another appetite. I learned that Porsche made a huge car running on battery, which is able to run very fast. Is that green? Well, I'm not sure. I'm totally sure that it's not green at all. It's just crazy. So I wish to tell them, okay, just think what you are doing in kind of life and what's your work, what's the impact of your work. I think it's more important. And okay, we'll try to do that.
Great, very good. So I've heard systems change from Gabriel. I've heard systems change from Claire, even though she sort of snuck it in. Trisha, I'm wondering what she thinks about the growth. But just to wrap up the panel here, if it was, if we step outside, rather as Gabriel has done really, he stepped outside of his domain really to question growth as a mantra. And of course, it's not just at a company level, it's how the world works and how finance is focused, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very big systemic question. So if you just had one thing that you wanted to put on the table, which could help us more safely, more securely, more quickly transition to a future where we're at least within a striking distance of effective decarbonisation, of the level of resilience and adaptation that we need to protect ourselves. The third is justice, do it in a way that's fair, that people aren't left behind. And then fourth is to embed the principles of circularity, so we don't have super fast Porsches coming out and being presented as a green alternative, unless they're part of a closed loop system. So if we thought about, and so whatever it is, just put it on the table. What is it? Is it policy? Is it behavioral change? Is it what do you ask for? Who's going to go first?
That's a tough one, Sam. I wish we could have a lot more things than just one. But
It's got to be quick.
I'll be very quick, and I think for me to be able to really change things at a faster speed, for sure. I know this is not a super long-term solution, but I think we should really be serious about putting a price on externalities. This is really going to push companies to make different decisions. I think it's started, but I think that's one way to push for something faster action. Let's just say that, at least from the private sector point of view.
Yeah.
I'll jump in. I would say universal integration of climate topics into education across all types of education. Specifically, not for the people that are getting an impact education, it's for the other people.
Gabriel?
Yeah, so exactly, education, I think it's a good point. As I see from here with my students, once they realize the importance of all of that, they already start to say, oh, what am I doing here? So in fact, it's not for all of them. I would say that there is 10% of students who really realize what is happening. And we have the chance to have them in front of us, and they are obliged to listen what we are saying, because at the end there is a mark. So it's a good opportunity to force them to listen. And I really think that knowledge is really important. And when they know, most of them will decrease their consumption, take less numerous of plane will decrease from infinite to maybe 0. And maybe just one more second about what is happening since the last decade at university is we are asking to have international international link with all other countries. Mm-hmm. Great, I love that. So let's go to Canada, let's go to Brazil, let's go to, I mean, it's crazy. And now we have a nice agreement with Costa Rica. I love Costa Rica, but we need to send them to send over there 20 students a year. It's just a nonsense. So that's something which is very important, how to have this link and have the to be sure that we are all the same community all over the world, but without traveling a lot. It's a tough thing, and that's something I'd like to, if you have any answer to this point.
Thank you. Marie, final word.
Yeah, thanks. Just to agree with everyone, education is key, because then if you have education, then you educate the consumers, and the consumers are the ones who are going to drive the change. So education is key indeed.
Okay.
Can I add just to...
Yeah, I just wanted to say, sorry for Cedric, what you were saying, like it's a huge challenge to make people collaborate more and travel less. And that's the huge challenge indeed. Thanks.
Sam, I want to reiterate as well, the education part is, I think the one I mentioned was more on a business perspective, but I think to challenge everyone to sort of ask themselves, what can I do at an individual level as a citizen, as a person, as a family member, but also at work. I think we have also a lot of impact there. So kind of, I'm not saying, to have multiple personalities, but to ask yourself what you can do in each one of your different roles to really have impact as well.
Okay, so thank you, panel one. Really interesting. I mean, to be honest, I wouldn't have expected everybody to agree that education was the most important. And I think for people perhaps outside of France, they might be thinking, this is probably one of the, best resourced educational systems in the world. And maybe that's a challenge. Maybe that means it's entrenched and therefore it's more difficult to change. I don't know, but it's super interesting for people outside of France to think about that and to think that you've all pretty much put that on the table. Of course, it's important, whether it's a priority or not. I think fascinating to debate. So thank you very much, panel one. So moving on to panel two. So thank you, Trisha. So I think that the hope here, I'm sure we'll cover some similar areas. I mean, we might not. It'll be interesting to see. But the idea here is that it was a little bit more place-based. So what we've just heard, obviously, is business, which doesn't really have a location necessarily. We've heard about education. We've heard about finance. We've heard about contracts underpinning infrastructure. So all of those end up in a place, obviously, eventually. But all of those are really sort of what feel like horizontal disciplines. And so the idea for the next panel was just loosely to make it slightly more based in a particular location. And for me, again, it's come up in other town halls where the importance of location is seen as so important, because that's obviously where everything meshes together. So where all the different dimensions are felt, where you've got to mitigate, but you've got to adapt, and you've got to think about justice because you're in a similar location. It's not like a business, which I forgive the businesses who are, but many businesses don't have to think about justice because they can move around and just worry about their employees or their direct suppliers or customers. So anyway, that was the idea of the panel two. So just as we did for panel one, if I could ask François to start, and then Princy, and then Victor, to give us your sort of 4-minute introduction and perspective, and then we can go from there. So thank you, François.
Yes. Thanks a lot, panel one, and thanks a lot, Sam, for the invitation. So my name is François de Rochette. I work for a think tank based in Paris, which is called Zenon Research, which focuses on climate technologies. So the technologies that can help to reduce GHG emissions or remove CO2 from the atmosphere. And our main activity is to inform decision makers through reports or conferences in order to provide them with insights on the newest scientific knowledge on those technologies. And it's not only content for policymakers, but all the contents we make are freely accessible. So it's also for a much larger audience, although the content is most of the time quite technical, it's open to everyone. We have many motivations behind that, among others. As was mentioned, climate technologies and climate action is, in general, evolves very, very fast, and it's sometimes quite hard to follow. And it's also, of course, an opportunity to put science in the middle of discussions and of debates, which is something we are strongly advocating for, having a science-based approach in political strategic decisions. And regarding the more local side, we are also trying to create a French ecosystem around climate technologies between different actors, from politicians to people working in finance or businesses in energy, banks, etc. So we are really trying to create that ecosystem and to bridge the science. We also have an anchor point at the University in Paris, Université PSL, bridging science and businesses, decision makers. Maybe it's interesting to provide a few insights on what we think of the role of technology in fighting climate change. Do we believe that innovation would save us all? The answer is no. Technology is a crucial action lever which will activate many other action levers, but it's by far not the only one. We often say there are 3 pillars to transitions: political, societal, and technological levers. And we decided to focus on the third one, which is also intertwined with the 2 others, of course. A few words on technology deployments. According to the International Energy Agency, we already have all the technologies we need to reach our goals for our mitigation goals for 2030. Renewables, heat pumps, electric vehicles, etc. What we focus on at Zenon is technologies that are not mature yet, that are still in laboratories or being demonstrated, which will obviously be deployed later, but whose development should start right now, because deployment times can take decades, as we have observed for photovoltaics, for instance. So we provide insights on which technologies may succeed, which ones might not, for which purpose, when, how, under which conditions, which co-benefits and which hazards there are and limitations. And all that also relates strongly to a local context. Let it be the energy mix, the political context. So that's also something we try to integrate in our analysis. I'll give some examples of technologies we focus on, maybe in the questions later. But yes, as you can understand, from a personal point of view, my work is focused on solutions. So there's indeed some kind of optimism in it, which doesn't mean I am optimistic all the time, especially when we see the challenges regarding the scaling of such technologies, and also more basically the news like Nord Stream 2 days ago leaking millions of tons of methane. It's just an example of those things that make this fight against climate change a kind of an emotional and intellectual roller coaster. So I think we all more or less connect on this, hearing from the presentation earlier. I think it's important to find some optimism in all this, which is easy to say. A few examples which are more personal and less professional from my side. I'd say, first of all, I think there's awareness is rising, especially in my generation, as Gabriel mentioned, also education. I think there's a really motive force in all that, and that evolved massively in the recent years. And I also see lots of civil commitment in the civil society. I'm part of several associations which, for instance, promote cycling in Paris, or the Shift Project as well, or Climate Collage, which educates people with very simple game on the climate issue. So yeah, I won't lie to you, there are moments of pessimism, that's for sure, but I think there are initiatives and signals such as Walk2COP also, for instance, which is, I think, is a great initiative to keep moving on and hoping for something better. Yeah.
Brilliant, Francois, thank you. And Princy, Francois is going to tell you all the tech that's going to help Paris a little bit later, but Princy, over to you.
Hi, hello everybody. I have a very strong French accent, so feel free to make me repeat or to question me if you don't understand what I mean. So yes, I work, like General Secretary, Executive Director for the Green Group in the Metropolis of Grand Paris. And I'm also consultant and in the field of citizen participation. And I work with various territorial actors. Yes, and I think it's important to know that the objects, the subject, the topic of my work can be very, very different too. It can be very specific issue related to urban planning, like the planning of new neighborhood, for example, as well as municipal program covering different aspects of municipal policies. Yes, but in all cases, when I'm working in this field, the objective is the same, to succeed in bringing together the conditions necessary for the expression and consideration of the needs and expectation of the citizen by turning them actors. And I think it's important I speak about that because you will be disappointed perhaps, Sam, because I haven't decided to describe all action led by the metropolis or by the city. I think for that we have institutional website. I think the added value of my presence is present the specificity of my approach. I think the specificity is the link I make between our ability to realize the ecological transition and at the same time our ability to change our democratical framework. I think it's very important. Why? Because a large-scale action, we call that, everybody here, implies for me mobilization of all, from the most isolated citizens to the highest decision maker. But the question is, how do that in our society? How do that in this society marked by strong tension and mistrust among citizens toward decision makers? How to do that in this society where we are encouraged to compete rather than cooperate with our peers in many areas of our life, work, for example? I think it's a good question, and because how can we agree on a model for ecological transition and work together for common objectives? It's a prealable. Many different solutions, perhaps convert the elite and impose drastic measures decided by the few in the name of ecologically responsible society, perhaps. But I don't think it's a good solution, because we could just expect costly challenges or a rejection of principle of everything related to the dogma of the ecological transition. So I don't think it's a good idea. Perhaps we can stake everything on grassroots initiative and hope that they spread across society. I have doubts too, because if it's clear we definitely owe a lot to the early environmental activists, we owe a lot, but the time is running out. We haven't many time. So I believe that one of the keys in our fight against the climate change is two main points. Firstly, our ability to revitalize our democracy, establishing a more just balance of power around issues that affect our societies. And secondly, at the same time, our ability to make the environmental transition a priority political topic in the democratic agenda. And we have to invite all citizens and stakeholders to be involved in the discussion and the decision. I'm not sure I have time to develop, but perhaps with question I can give more elements about my analysis of the lecture by citizen of the climate change, and about the environmental democracy, perhaps after.
Okay, Princy, fantastic. And so, just to sort of, so to paraphrase, and just either tell me I got it wrong now or then develop it in a minute after we've heard from Victor, but I think I heard in your summary there, so one is to change the basis of the way the democracy works, and it'd be interesting to hear. The second one was then to put the, the ecological transition at the heart of it. And then the third, and obviously these are related, the third is then to allow the citizen voice.
Yes, clearly, yes.
Okay. Yes, super interesting. Thank you. Victor.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Sam. Can you listen to me? Yes, thank you. Well, I would like to introduce our association by some figures. In the building sector, in terms of energy consumptions, represents 44%. It's huge. So our association promotes the passive house standard. If you don't know about it, it's a standard for construction and refurbishment. And despite its name, it applies to all types of buildings, not only houses. We have schools, we have restaurants, we have supermarkets, we have social dwellings. We have you can also make swimming pools, passive house. So it's a robust and low-tech solution which exists. It has been existing for more than 30 years now, and it's a very pragmatic solution. It's an optimized design method which aims at minimizing the heat demand of buildings, whatever type it is, maximize the comfort for users, and also aims at being resilient. So this is a powerful solution for the building sector in order to decarbonize so to have a real impact on global warming. So it's very pragmatic again, to mitigate the our dependence of fossil fuels importation, which is a burning topic these days with the energy crisis, and to fight against fuel poverty, because if you spend less on energy bills, basically you have more budget free for the rest of things you would need. What we do as an association, so we are based in Paris, but we work on all France. Priority is put on communication on passive house solution and federating professional network of building sector, and also to give some advice on how I can achieve this kind of energy, high energy efficiency. Because basically a passive house is very insulated house, which main heating source is the sun through the windows. I won't go further in details, it's not a technical presentation. And so we also train, we were talking, the first panel talked a lot about the I miss the word in English, and
education training.
Education, thank you. So we train building professionals so that they learn how to build, how to refurbish, and how to design passive houses. So it's very pragmatic again. And we also certify buildings as a quality insurance. And well, and I would be glad to exchange with Princy, maybe to know a bit more about what the Grand Paris could maybe do about energy efficiency in the building sectors here or afterwards.
Okay, Victor, thank you. So while Prince is thinking about that question, let us just go to, okay, so you know, very interesting, obviously different backgrounds or different perspectives, should I say. Let's think then about you know, what's being done. So maybe the question for, I think, for each of you really, you know, Francois, you sort of you teased us by talking about the technologies that are going to come. So just tell us where you think there's some success. That would be interesting. I think, Princey, for you again, it's such a huge question. You know, it can't be binary. It can't be, you know, we can't sort of move to that immediately. So what optimism, you know, what things have happened that give you confidence that we can actually tackle those things you're talking about? And Victor, I think for you, you know, it's obviously what you didn't say, what I hope you'll tell us in a minute, but you know, how much more efficient can you be with passive house? And okay. And it sounds super interesting. So how do we make this something that is just, you know, embedded in the way that we think about our housing stock? And this is a very topical thing for the UK, how do we make sure everybody can afford it, then it's not just the top end of the housing? So let's just, I mean, you can talk about something else, but those are three, I think, sort of things that immediately come up from what people have said. So can we just sort of, Francois, go back to you to begin with?
Yes, that's a massive question. What has been done? I think I'm going to stick, first of all, to the technological side, which is my professional specialization, but also going to discuss a bit the rest, because it's all, as I said, intertwined, and yeah, having clean technology doesn't replace lowering demand or sufficiency considerations. So I think this needs to be precise first. Regarding innovation, first of all, as I said, until 2030, we have basically all the technologies we need. The question is, it's only a matter of political courage and also finance tools. Regarding political courage, we had a good example in the last days, the last week, of the French government making a real push on their announcements in terms of developing renewables and nuclear. So regarding our low carbon energy mix, there's, again, those are only announcements and targets, but at least it's still, I think, kind of motivating. But as I said, the technologies are ready. It's a matter of political decisions. In terms of research, there's also quite a lot being done in France, but not only. So the technologies which I work on are carbon capture, so either removing carbon directly from the atmosphere or from industrial processes. It's one of the levers that is mentioned and assessed in the latest IPCC report, and which is still very at very nascent stages of development. But in France, we have a focus on carbon capture and utilization, so capturing carbon and using it for synthetic fuels, for instance, or for also replacing usual uses of CO2 in beverages, in greenhouses. There are many different applications, and this is one of the fields which in France is being researched. We also have in France quite big actors in the cement industry, in the steel industry, and also in aviation, obviously, which are fields that are very, very difficult to, in which it is very difficult to abate emissions in time. So again, for instance, regarding cement, there's this year a report by the French Environment Agency, the ADEME, was published, and our big actors in the cement industry, also in the steel industry, are really focusing on that. And those are technologies which are not ready yet to be deployed at scale, but they are being researched. And in the next few years, it's mostly a question of how can we go as fast as possible in deploying them, while also thinking on, do we absolutely need that much cement, that much steel? It's kind of always articulating demand with supply and what we need, what we can do for the consumption we can't reduce. So there are many things to say, but that would be my point of view.
Yeah. And you're smiling with optimism, Francois. You're sort of neutral.
I'd say I'm rather pessimistic by nature, but trying to be optimistic.
Okay, I got it. Just Princy, before we go to you, there was a great point from somebody who's listening in. So Brigitte, she's made the point that actually in schools, kids are getting it. And actually, I would second that. So when we walked up to Glasgow, we spoke to schools. 2/3 of the schools, well, by the time we got closer to COP, 2/3 of the kids in the class raised their hand when we asked them what COP, if they knew about COP. And remember, that takes a bit of courage because they know there's going to be a follow-up question, right? So there might have been some people there being, overinflating their knowledge, but I doubt it. So I think, Brigitte, you're right. And so what Brigitte goes on to say is actually, you can read it yourselves, but basically the, education on the topic is actually for the older folk. Yes, at the universities, definitely, but people in business and people receiving their pension and sitting on AGMs and voting and, we're the ones who've got to roll back some of the stuff we've learned and learn some new stuff. And probably the kids in school are getting it. So anyway, Brigitte, thank you for that intervention. Very, very welcome. So Princy, over to you. Tell us the good news.
Yeah, I have two questions, one from you and one from Victor. I can start with you, Sam, perhaps, and after Victor, I don't forget you, I promise. How to be more confident? Big question. I think today, what is missing is a strong link between citizens' initiatives, for example, and actions carried out at the government level. And in my view, the link can exist in the creation of a framework for collective deliberation and decision making around the climate change, for example, but around all topics of our society. And first steps have been taken in this direction in the field of climatic democracy, specifically. I'm thinking, for example, of the Citizen Convention for the Climate at the national level, or of the public inquiry, correct me, made compulsory by the environment regulation for any development project affecting the environment. And at local level, we have the citizens' vote organized around the air climate energy plan. Yeah, so things exist, but for me, these methods do not allow a debate and a political, the word is important, a political decision from citizens. As a matter of fact, with the convention of sample of individuals, when we train for a few days on a topic, and it's only from there that the drafting of proposal becomes possible. There is therefore not a well-adjusted balance of power. A few citizens propose to be representative of an entire population, and that before, in the face of the enormity of the institutional machine. It's not, we haven't a good equilibrium between the both. And recommendations that are not expressed according to value or societal aspiration, but rather according to transmitted technical expertise. I think this point is interesting because it's there is a link with the previous intervention about education, and we have to be careful. We haven't to be too much technocratic, I think. In the case of vote or public inquiries, it's even worse. We haven't the opportunity to talk about our common values and the way in which they should be embodied in a social and public policy project. We submit ready-made projects to which must consent or, on the contrary, object, without any real possibility of amendment. So no real debate and political discussion. So yes, it's not the right way to build our society together. This is not for me the right way to decide for our future together. So yes, we have an achievement, but we have to make progress. And I think we have to process step by step in the right order. Firstly, all together, let's agree on values and orientation. For that, we need of a collective and wide discussion about our conception of the society and of the future. Secondly, altogether, let's identify priorities for action and objectives for our society. Thirdly, altogether, let's think about project proposal and bring experts and technicians to express their know-how in this direction. Citizens don't have to replace experts, but experts must design proposals integrating collective orientation. It's important. And finally, let's check the compliance of our project with the expectation previously expressed by citizens and territorial actors. Yes, I think it's the design that we have to respect. Yes, so it's my answer at your question, Sam. And for the question of Victor, yes, Metropole of Grand Paris can make things. For example, we have plans. I think of the SCOT, le schéma de cohérence territoriale. I don't know the good translation in English. And we have the PMHH, le plan métropolitain pour l'habitat, habitation. and l'habitat et le plan métropolitain pour l'habitat et l'hébergement. How to say that for migrants, for example, so how we can care migrants on our territory. And I think what we can do is integrate ecological measure, ecological decision in our design of solution. We haven't just act in the field of environment. We have to design policies which integrates environment challenges. I'm not sure I'm very clear, but yes. Ecology is not a sectorial policy. It's my word, my message, and yes, and the problem with the metropole is it's today we lack of competencies and we lack of budget to financial our solution. So yes, we can have a global think about ecology, but we are very limited to act. Yes, so we need an institutional reform.
Thank you, Princy, for your very good answer. And well, if I may, maybe I have some ideas for you. Well, Sam, you noticed I didn't give figures before. And the passive house standard is like the highest energy efficiency standard in terms of energy. If you compare an old building without insulation and a passive house, the global consumption will be divided by 5, and the heating consumption will be divided by 10. Compared to something old and uninsulated, so before the petrol shocks, or I don't know the word in English. Well, you also asked if we were enthusiastic. Well, it depends on the days, but to be honest, on a technological level, I really trust that the technology to save energy in the building sector exists, is robust, and it's not that hard to make exist. So it's not on research, okay. And I wanted to add some ideas of what is locally happening in France. For example, the small city of Trévoux, it's called close Saint-Étienne, decided to modify their urban planning regulation so that the private promoters who want to build some buildings and then sell them are allowed to build 1 story more, so 1 story higher, if they build passive house. So you have a more efficient building, but you can sell more. It's maybe a bit more expensive, but actually you sell more surface, so it's more economically rentable. So this is one idea. This is on the private sector, where the cities can have an influence, and I don't know how, but maybe Grand Paris also could maybe incentive the cities of the Parisian community to make such things. And I also want to underline, actually in Paris or in the suburbs, the Conseil départemental du Val-de-Marne, which is a department in France, close to Paris, decided to build all their schools, which calls college, but it's not universities like for teenagers. All their schools in passive house or a new or refurbishment. So there are also some public deciders, like public decision makers, who really take the decision to build for the future and to build more efficiently.
So just Victor, one thing you mentioned was permits. I think that was you, wasn't it? Yeah. Or somebody mentioned it. So the difficulty of getting permits, so building permission, planning permission. Okay, was that, who mentioned that?
No, I just mentioned that a city allows different ways of the permit allows you to construct higher if you construct more efficient.
Yeah, so that was a good solution. I know. So yeah, somebody was talking about windmills. Yeah, so wind power, and saying that permitting environment or infrastructure it's very difficult to get there, and you need a lot of approval. And I suppose, you know, this brings me around, Princy, perhaps to what you're talking about as well, which is, of course, you want to, and to education, of course, you want to take into account local people's concerns. However, you know, you've got to get around that, because while everybody might agree a windmill is a good thing, they don't want it in their garden. So there is a challenge, I guess, both in terms of the way that you know, planning permission is organized, who's involved in that, and what priorities are considered. Because, you know, if we just stick with the status quo, it sounds like there's just too many barriers to achieve the speed of change that we need. And I guess you trying to push Passive House, you provided some good examples of where people have stimulated the market and provide incentives, but presumably there's lots of other examples where it's actually very difficult to push it out.
Yes, I mean, I think if there is no incentives, it's more complicated. I also can talk about the incentives in terms of when you are owner of a dwelling, and you can have some incentives, but I don't know if the question was going in that direction.
Okay, so we have an interesting question, an involved question. Can you all see the Q&A? Yeah.
Yes.
So could you just have a look at Hannah's question there? Oh, it's Doug. So I think that's Hannah's partner. So I'd like to hear from the panel about their thoughts on combating ingrained ignorance and apathy at a local level. For instance, in the Southwest, we experience a lot of denialism. Farmers accept the weather's changing, yeah, but they fill in ponds with cement, they cut hedgerows, and they increase the culture of monocrops. From a building perspective, we're surrounded by limestone, and yet it's impossible to find builders who will work without concrete. Can Victor speak to his experience with the building industry about moving away from concrete? So maybe two things there. You know, it sounds like we might be back to education as well, but maybe Victor, you could take that first.
Also, actually, I can answer the last part. Thanks for your question. Actually, half of the passive house built in France are made out of wooden structure, but it's half of them. I mean, we also see passive house with concrete, so both solution can allow us to obtain a very efficient building. Nevertheless, half of the building is quite a lot. It's much more than the national average. So it's also means that people who are convinced by passive house have also very strong ecological values beyond the energetical consumption of buildings. But well, I can't say that concrete will disappear. I'm not observing this.
And maybe that first bit of the question, Princy, is a question perhaps for you, because for your objectives, yeah, to happen, you know, you need to, obviously people need to be educated and they need to understand, you know, what they can do and what's happening. And Doug talks about denialism. So people are denying that maybe climate change is going to happen, or maybe they're denying that it's going to affect them in some shape or form. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts there about how do you condition, if you like, the citizens to know and think that this is important. I mean, it's close to the education point we had in the first panel, but any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure I have understand well the question. Your question is how to promote this kind of action. Can you repeat, please?
Yeah. So Doug's question is where he is in the Southwest. Mm-hmm. He meets people who are denying the changes happening, denying the impact of what they do on the future, and and if everybody does do that and denies and either doesn't know or doesn't want to recognize that the world is changing and they've got to play a part, then how does your world of better democracy, ecological embedding in democratic process, how does that work? So how do we get around an electorate, citizens who don't know or don't want to know?
Yeah, so why everybody is not don't know and is not the same lecture, perhaps. Yes, it's an interesting point. Perhaps I can share some of the constraints I had during my different experience of participation in France. What I see is more than 5 years. Everybody talk about ecology, and each category of people. It wasn't true. There is 5 years ago. So yes, but that I can say that it's a persist difference in the comprehension and the lecture of the climate change, and I think that's why everybody don't act for the climate change. I think for a category of people, environment is overall synonymous with quality of life issues. Many people speak about cleanliness, for example, or greening of public spaces in particular, but they don't understand the implication in terms of biodiversity, for example, or global warming. There is not a connection. And the consequence of this partial analysis is that the plan of daily action for the environment is not complete. Example, I don't know, sorting or light, etc. They are not attentive because they don't understand totally. And we have other people. Other people who feel most directly the impact, in particularly in neighborhood, in urban and peri-urban areas, because individuals are directly affected by the air pollution, for example, and these individuals, are often more willing to act and or accept political decision in a logic of individual preservation. You see, so depend, I think, of our feeling of impacts. Yes, and I think the good way to get the same level of knowledge is a debate, because we can exchange our experience, we can create a common knowledge, and we can also put in perspective, I don't know if this exists, our own interest, and understand that sometimes our interest is in contradiction with other interests. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I think, what will stay with me is your point about quality of life connecting through to the things which are helping us address climate change. I think that's a really important point.
Yes.
Okay, so just to wrap up, everybody, just same for panel one. So panel two, only choose one thing out of all those broad experiences you've had. Francois with your, climate fresque or your professional work, Princy, your 2 or 3 jobs by the sound of it, Victor with your passion for passive. So what one thing, if you could wish for it, to fundamentally change the speed, the scope, the scale of the transition in France?
I'm sorry, but my answer won't be surprising. I also say, not say education, let's say knowledge sharing at all levels for people who have no idea what the IPCC is, what climate actually is, what's the difference between climate and weather. I think we obviously need to get those people involved. We also need to get decision makers involved, and that's a massive range, and we need targeted communication to each of these audiences, and I think that's something which is increasing, but not at the right speed maybe. So again, more emphasis on this, and also talking about France in particular, I really have the feeling, and that's also a reason for my commitment to Zenon and having a science-based approach in the debates regarding energy or electric vehicles, for instance. We have so-called experts, which actually are not expert at all in the strict definition of the term. The people who just, if you just write a book on a topic, you're not an expert. An expert is recognized by other people working in the field. And I think on electric vehicles and the energy mix, for instance, we have quite a chaotic debate in France. And that, of course, has to do with, well, it has many different implications. The media, how the media and whom they give the opportunity to speak. And for the same reason that we need knowledge to understand, and knowledge and science to understand the state of the climate at the moment, we also need the same rigor and the same level of education on the solutions. That's really the same thing. And I think that is something, if we could have that, it would push us much, much further, I would say.
Very good, thank you. Princy?
Yeah. So ecological innovation and expertise is very important, and I think every participant today for our work is very important. But I think if we want to spread this solution, let's the implementation of this solution, sorry. I think we have to restore a relationship of trust and cohesion within our society. And secondly, we have to renew our democracy so that all of us can fully make the most of our ability to decide and to act for the environment. Yes, just that.
Thank you. Final word, Victor.
Oh, thank you. Well, I would also say, obviously, education, but in some different perspectives. First of all, for politics, because I still feel politics don't get much about climate change, although it's slowly changing. They got, our government got some classes this month about climate change, which is a revolution, but it's not enough. Education also, on my perspective, for the building sector, to learn that it is possible to achieve very high efficiency, but it's under some conditions, and this can't be improvised. It has to be planned, and for that you have to have some knowledge. And also for the general public, I would say most of people still are surprised that it's possible to build building which you barely need to heat in the winter. And so it's possible. It's not science fiction, and it's not a big deal. So that's why we are also betting on communication. And yes, I think I said everything I wanted to say. Thank you, Sam, for this.
So just before I thank you, and I do want to thank you properly, but so in terms of getting engaged with Walk2COP27, so you all have, thank you, but also, you know, based on what we're thinking about, this is, I hope, one way of bringing some of these messages to lots of people. So as I said, we'll promote this afterwards. Please promote it as well, but also please get involved. Think about your organizations and whether or not, or your contacts or your friends, and whether or not they want to engage in this. And, you know, I'm not pushing this, you know, there are lots of other good ideas and initiatives knocking around as well, but this is one way. So register, get a team going, let's walk to COP27, let's share knowledge, let's feel part of the collective, feel a sense of solidarity, and make some really good connections. So that's one, the register, yeah? Town halls, there'll be other town halls. And, you know, having you guys ask questions, or the people, some great questions from the floor today, having those questions come into the other town halls, fantastic. You know, we don't want just having the nationals in the particular town hall. So if it's all French in the French town hall or English in the English, we're not really delivering what we set out to do. The third thing is bring your expertise, run a Clubhouse session. And again, let's promote that and get that out. We record it. It's an asset that you can use to educate people. It's a different format. So please have a think about that. People online, people listening. Do get engaged, register, reach out, look at the website, and then also dip into the other initiatives that have been mentioned today. So for instance, Francois, you said Climate Fresque, or can't quite remember, it's called various things in different countries, but it's an amazing initiative. It's quite recent in England, for instance, but it's a big initiative. I think there's tens of thousands of people who've been trained as Climate Fresque tutors, I think I'm right in saying. You know, it's an incredible initiative. So anyway, that's a plug to get everybody involved there. Thank you so much, everybody, for being there. Thank you, people, for listening in. Thank you, people who are listening on replay. Everybody's obviously thinking hard about this, and for that, we should all thank you for the great work that you're doing and the contribution to the transition that we're all trying to make. So thank you again. Have a good afternoon.